The UFO disclosure conversation is louder than ever, with new government files, high-profile briefings, and even pastors being pulled into the discussion. Today, we're tackling one of the most important and controversial topics facing Christians right now. How should we approach all this talk of UFOs, aliens, and non-human intelligence? We're called to have an open mind, but a guarded one, of course. We don't want to be deceived, but we also don't want to bury our heads in the sand either. The news you need to know, but with solutions and hope. This is Get Free with Kristi Leigh.
Do people think that there's one type of non-human intelligence that's visiting the Earth, or is there many, many types?
People who have been involved in recoveries have said
there are at least four separate types. Now, I have not had direct access to that, but I believe the people who I talk to.
Four different types of life.
Four different types of life.
A former CIA-funded researcher says the U.S. government has recovered 4 distinct alien species from crashed UFOs. Dr. Hal Puthoff says insiders told him there are at least 4. And his colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, has previously named them as Greys, Nordics, Reptilians, and Insectoids. As a Christian, we might toss this news aside as, oh, this is a distraction. We might even call it part of the Great Deception. But what if UFO disclosure can actually fit into the biblical narrative in a way we haven't decoded? Here to discuss is Timothy Alberino, a leading Christian researcher, explorer, and filmmaker known as a modern-day Indiana Jones. He's the author of the bestselling book Birthright and has spent years investigating ancient civilizations, biblical mysteries, and the UFO phenomenon. Timothy, thank you so much for joining me. So excited to talk about this subject. I've turned so many folks onto your book, Birthright, and I'm finally getting around to reading it myself. I've got it right here. It's funny, I've recommended it without having read it myself yet, but I've had enough discussions with you, seen enough of your work that I'm like, I will get around to that. You know, I had 2 babies back to back, so it's been a little crazy. I'm finally getting into it. I know you get it because you also have 5 children.
I do.
But yes, this is, I think, such an important topic. My eyes have been open in such an exciting way. And I hope you don't mind, but I actually want to read just one little quick paragraph from this book, Birthright,
Sure.
A note from you, actually. Before I was introduced to you, I've been a huge Chuck Missler fan, and he was probably one of the first ones that started making me question things. It was just decoding the Bible in a whole new way. And so I like this paragraph in your introduction. You say the late Chuck Missler would often describe the 66 books of the Bible, penned by more than 40 different people over a period of several thousand years, as a highly integrated message system from an extraterrestrial source outside of time. Like a hologram, a facet of the message is encoded on every page that, when illuminated by the light of the Spirit, projects a multidimensional portrait of its divine author and communicates his plan to redeem, reconcile, and restore the sons and daughters of Adam to the glory of their original estate in the family of God. I just thought there was such a great way of describing this heavy topic we're going to get into, and we only have a short period of time, so I do encourage, again, people to read the whole book, as I am doing right now. But I wanted to read that as an introduction, because that is the thing. Like, the Bible, we haven't given enough credit. Like, there is so much deeper and dimensional and profound than we've ever given it credit for. I mean, it says in John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Like, the Word is Jesus. I mean, it's so exciting. Obviously, I'm getting excited. But let's talk about, the Pentagon announcing that over 1 billion people around the world have visited this official UFO website. Second major release of UAP files currently being processed and will be posted very soon. Many are already not buying that we're going to get the full truth. What is your take on that? Do you think we'll ever get the full truth of what they've seen, observed?
Well, thank you for having me back on, Kristi. I miss Chuck Missler dearly. His voice would have been very, I think, dominant in the Christian community during this time. He would have had great insights and did have great insights. I'm taking this White House directive, this presidential directive to release the alien and UFO files, Trump was very explicit. He said the alien files, the UFO files, the UAP files, like covering all the bases. He wants to tell the American people the truth. I'm not sure, to begin with, I think we need to frame this properly. I'm not sure how well read in the President of the United States is on this topic, and that sounds shocking to people. But the truth is that presidents are not typically told about the reality of the alien presence. And I think that the Trump administration, Trump and certainly Pete Hegseth and probably Vance and Rubio, have been read in on some level. In other words, they've been told the baseline reality of this thing, that UFOs are real and some of this phenomenon is non-human. I think that they've been told that. I'm not sure personally that they've been told any more than that. In fact, J.D. Vance in recent months made the viral comment that he thinks that this could be demons, right? That the phenomenon could be demons. But then he also said that he doesn't have any special knowledge regarding this phenomenon. He's not been told anything behind the scenes that would give him any kind of confidence one way or the other. So I think we start there. The president, this was an easy deliverable for President Trump before the midterm elections. He knows that there's a great interest, that there's a sincere public interest in this topic. It's very popular. It's obviously, it's not a political issue. It's something that both people on both sides of the aisle want, is disclosure, some level of disclosure, UFO disclosure, UAP disclosure. And this is unprecedented. We've never had a president do something like this. And so Trump is operating from a limited knowledge base, and I would add limited access. Trump and Hegseth and Patel, everyone in the Trump administration, Gabbard, they're all operating from limited knowledge and limited access. And that second one is very important because I think they're doing the best that they can to inform the American people about this phenomenon without breaching national security concerns. So we're not going to get photos from classified projects. I doubt we're going to get anything from any of these special access programs. We're not going to get pictures of aliens, and I very highly doubt we're going to get anybody in the administration, Trump or anyone else, coming to the podium and announcing that aliens exist or extraterrestrial life is real. What I've heard and what Trump has actually said in a couple of his posts is that he's going to put as much out there as he possibly can, according to his directive, and he's going to allow the American people to decide. And I've been told behind the scenes, the idea is that we're going to be given enough information to draw the correct conclusion. And the correct conclusion is that we're not alone. That's the correct conclusion. I believe the president knows that to be a fact at this point. Everybody that's working on this knows that to be a fact. And I think that they're hoping and trusting that the American people are going to draw that conclusion after we're done with the document dump. Because as you probably know, this has only just begun. I was told that we're going to get new documents about every 2 weeks, and that the revelations, the material is going to get increasingly more spectacular, is the word that was used in my communication. So I expect to see more, and I expect to see more videos, more footage, the kind of footage, for example, that Congressman Eric Burleson, Tim Burchett, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna have been referring to, that they've seen behind the scenes, that they've been pushing to get released. We're going to see some of that going forward. And some of that footage, it sounds like it's quite astounding, that people gasp when they see it because it's undeniable.
Yeah, I want to go back to that comment by Vice President J.D. Vance, because I thought it was so telling. I think it's super relatable. It's exactly how I would have responded years ago. I'd have been like, well, there's no such thing as aliens. It's demons. We're in a spiritual warfare. That's totally exactly what I would have said. Now I'm like, I'm not so sure. But let's go ahead and hear from him. And then we got to try and break this down. Get to the meat and go back to defining some terms. But let's go ahead and listen to that, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons anyway. But that's a longer discussion.
Well, I can't let you go without a follow-up on that, because Barack Obama is on this podcast and he goes, yeah, aliens are real, but like, here's where they're not. And, you know,
I did not.
and so Obama says,
I didn't
yes,
hear that
aliens
one.
are, he gets asked point blank, are aliens real? He says, oh, yeah. And then he goes, but they're not at Area 51. And
Well, where are they, bro?
Well, that's what he says. Right. That's a great question.
I need
Trump
to see
had to go
this-
save
I
them,
need
and
to
he
see
said
this
he's going to
podcast.
declassify.
Okay.
So you think they're demons?
Well, look, I think that celestial beings who fly around, who do weird things to people, I think that the desire to describe everything celestial, everything as otherworldly, to describe it as aliens, I mean, every great world religion, including Christianity, the one that I believe in, has understood that there are weird things out there, and there are things that are very difficult to explain. And I naturally go, when I hear about sort of extra natural phenomenon, that's where I go to, is the Christian understanding that, you know, there's a lot of good out there, but there's also some evil out there. And I think that one of the devil's great tricks is to convince people he never existed.
So a couple things to unpack here. There is some that are going to say this is spiritual warfare. This is a distraction. This is part of the Great Deception. Prepare yourself for that. But we need to break down what these words mean, because he's saying, I think aliens are demons. Okay, well, what is a demon? How is that different than a fallen angel? What is this thing called a Nephilim? How is that different than extraterrestrial? I mean, I think the confusion is people use all of these terms interchangeably, but there's very specific meanings to all of these commonly misunderstood terms. So that's a tough call, but can you start to break down the difference between these words?
Sure. I would say, in response to the Vice President's opinion on this phenomenon, in that he believes it's demons, I would say that the opposite of what he said is true. That the reaction that people have right now, and that people are having to disclosure, isn't this is all extraterrestrial, aliens are real. It's exactly what he's voicing. Oh, this is all demonic. I mean, that's the narrative that's coming out of the conservative side of the equation more broadly, but the Christian side more specifically. And I think that in order to understand this phenomenon, we have to embrace the complexity of it. And we have to define our terminology, and we have to work within the parameters of what we know to be true. Okay, you can't throw a word like demon at something, at a topic, at a phenomenon that is as highly complex as this one, and walk away with the satisfaction of having solved this mystery. So you're right. So we have to define our terms. So if you're coming at this from a biblical perspective, which I do, then if you're going to use the word demon, then you have to qualify that word. Are we talking about a demon within the context, strictly within the biblical framework? Or are we using the word demon in the way that it is employed in Western Christian culture, generally speaking? Those are two very, very different questions, because the Bible constrains this topic. It doesn't really give us the liberty to take the word demon and plaster it over everything that is non-human and that is inexplicable. That's not a biblical principle. Now, that has become part of the Western Christian tradition. Anything that is scary, anything that is inexplicable, anything that seems nefarious or grotesque, we call demon or demons. And that's a very ambiguous word. It's amorphous. It doesn't really mean anything specific. So it's very problematic in this conversation. Now, biblically speaking, and this may shock some of your audience, but biblically speaking, within the framework of Hebrew cosmology, a demon is something very, very specific. A demon is, believe it or not, the disembodied spirit of a dead giant from the antediluvian world. That's what a demon is. And this is explicitly clear in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the broadly speaking, in the Second Temple literature. And by the way, Jesus of Nazareth falls into the period of Second Temple, and so it's not ambiguous they knew what a demon was. When demons are referenced in the Bible, there's two things that are being referenced. We take the word demon and our English translations, there's others. There are a lot of specific words used for different kinds of entities in the Bible, and we take the word demon. We translate much of this as demon or demons, which is also problematic. So what is a demon? Again, according to Hebrew cosmology, a demon is the disembodied spirit of a dead giant. These are the possessing spirits. These are the spirits that, for example, in the Gadarene demoniac that ran up to Jesus and threw himself at Jesus' feet and said, "Why have you come? We know who you are, you Son of God. Why have you come to torment us before the appointed time?" By the way, that's a reference to the book of Enoch. That's what a demon is. Those spirits are disembodied. They inhabit the human flesh. This tradition goes back to the Enochic tradition, back to the book of Enoch, the origin of this. We don't have to get into that if you don't want right now. But and then if we deconstruct this idea that aliens are demons, I think what most Christians are saying, certainly what J.D. Vance is most likely saying, in my opinion, is he's taking the idea of a fallen angel, and which is, by the way, fallen angel is not a biblical word. It's a biblical concept, but it's not biblical terminology. He's taking the idea of a fallen angel and including that that kind of being, that class of being, into or under the demon denomination. And that's what a lot of people do, especially people who are coming from Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy. When they say demon, what they're actually doing, I think, is invoking the bad guys. We're going to say demon, and what we mean is all of the bad spiritual entities out there, fallen angels, everything under that umbrella. And I understand that. I see why people do that, but it's very, very confusing because it's not technically correct, and it causes, and it's very reductionist, and it is a gross oversimplification of a very highly complex topic and of a highly complex phenomenon, a phenomenon which includes nuts and bolts technology, biological bodies. Okay, remember I said we have to restrain ourselves within the parameters of what's real. And this is what's real. This is what the whistleblowers have said. This is what they've said under oath before Congress. This is what ufologists have known for decades, that we have the craft and we have the bodies, that we've been reverse engineering the craft, the so-called legacy program, and we've been deriving functional technology from this. So when you take this complex reality and you just put the demon label over it, it seems absurd, especially to secular people. It seems medieval and absurd. Now, one final thought here on this question. Do I believe that some of the activity that we see, that we categorize as UAP, could be attributed to angelic beings, good and bad, by the way? My answer would be yes, because I believe that angels use technology. I think the Bible is actually quite clear about this. Angels utilize technology. I mean, there's something called the chariots of God. It's variously called the chariots of God, the chariots of Israel, and the chariots of fire, all the same thing in the biblical text. These are vehicles of conveyance. And these are vehicles that go from A to B. They're not, people are accustomed to thinking about angels in the way we think about the genie from Aladdin's lamp, that they're these all-powerful beings that can just transform themselves into anything. They're ethereal. They don't actually have a physical form, but they take on a physical form. None of that is actually derived from the scriptures. In fact, the Hebrew understanding, the Hebrew cosmological perspective of angels is quite the opposite. They are physical beings. They do physical things. They eat and drink. They do so in the biblical narrative. They do it with Abraham and Lot. Everything they do that we see angels doing in the scriptures are things we do. So I think we've created a false dichotomy in our mind. Christians have, modern Western Christians, and we've taken everything that is has to do with angels or anything that is demonic, and we've relegated it to the the immaterial, disembodied, quote unquote, spiritual realm. I think that's a big mistake. And that's a product, in my estimation, of medieval theology. That's not coming directly from the Bible. And so this is what causes all the confusion. Now, if you want to be really accurate, biblically speaking, the first thing that we should do is acknowledge, number one, we need to show humility is the very first thing. We need to approach this as Christians from a perspective of humility. Why? Because we should not limit God in any way.
Yeah.
We should not come out of the gates and say God wouldn't, or God can't, or God didn't. That is hubris. That is presenting a narrative that is not established or supported in the scriptures. God can do whatever he wants, wherever he wants, whenever he wants. He can create a multitude of life. He will not be, has not been, cannot be constrained by human beings, by our opinions of what we think he should and shouldn't do. Okay? Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search things out. That means that there are things that God does. He purposely conceals it from us. He does not tell us everything he does. This is supported in Deuteronomy 29:29, which reads, the secret things belong to the Lord our God. The secret things. But those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, including the gospel of his Son. That's been revealed. That belongs to us forever. It's unchanged. It's unaffected, whether or not there's extraterrestrials inhabiting the universe. It makes no difference. It doesn't change the doctrine of Christ. And there's nothing in the scriptures that constrain the maker from creating other sentient beings. Nothing whatsoever. So these are some misconceptions that we have to deal with right off the bat if you're going to have a conversation about this phenomenon within a biblical paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to try and go super quick through some things that I think we need to start off with in the beginning so we can get into the bigger meat of this, of some questions I have for you. So just stop me if I get something wrong. But I love that you point out this concept of anthropocentric versus Christocentric, where we as Christians were usually brought up to think that we're the center of the universe, we're the apple of God's eye, everything is surrounding us. And yes, although we are deeply loved by our Creator, that doesn't mean that we're the center. Christ is the center. I think that you need to start from there. Super
That's right.
eye-opening. And then you need to start from the very beginning. Verse 1 and 2 of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And there is this view that Chuck Missler championed, or at least conveyed, that there may be a pause, verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, the translation, he says the Hebrew word for was is haya, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and it says that it should be translated become or had become, implying the earth underwent a negative transformation from an original state. So there's something that happened between 1 and 2. We can acknowledge that angels were already present before we were created. Job 38:4-7 says, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And then if we go back to the Hebrew, B'nai ha-Elohim, sons of the God, generally refers to angelic beings. So here we're getting a peek in Job that angels were there to witness the creation. So angels were there. What else was there? What else happened between verse 1 and 2 of the Bible? And then you briefly touched upon demons as being Nephilim. And here's something else that I've heard you talk about. Sometimes this is translated as, Nephilim is translated as fallen angels, which makes it confusing. So wait a minute. Fallen angels are, the angels that rebelled against God, but Nephilim can be in the Greek translated as giants, and the product of angels looking on the daughters of men. So their product. So forgive me for that really rude breakdown of
great.
the
you laid it out very, very, very well.
But
no, you laid it out very well. That was perfect. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right when you say that the starting point of this conversation is what kind of a paradigm do you have of the universe? Who's at the center of this thing? Whose story is this really? Right? And we've gotten this wrong for hundreds of years because we have, I think, inadvertently made the story about ourselves. We've placed ourselves at the center of the universe. And I always like to tell people, to help them work through this in their minds, envision the universe, everything in the universe, and especially all of the conscious players in this game, so to speak. Envision it as a big wagon wheel, one of those big old wooden wagon wheels. And at the center of that wheel, you have the hub, and then you have all the wooden spokes connecting to the hub. That's that's all of the universe, everything that's encompassed in the universe. And all of those spokes represent any of the sentient beings that are in the universe are spokes. So who's at the center of this thing? Who is this thing revolving around? Why does the universe exist? And why is anything that's happening at all? Why? What's the reason? Well, the Bible is explicit about this. Mankind, see, the anthropocentric perspective, which means the man-centric perspective, the human-centric perspective, it places mankind at the center of that wheel. We are the hub of that wheel. And everything that's going on in the universe and everything that's unfolding in the Bible is happening because of us and for us. And all these other players in the game, again, all these other intelligences that may exist in the universe, they exist basically to watch our story unfold and to play some role in it. Now, that is not articulating exactly the doctrine of, for example, the Catholic Church, the Orthodox, and a lot of Protestant denominations, but it is an articulation of the way that most Christians perceive the universe, okay? So that is not a biblical position. It is not biblically accurate. The Bible expresses, in the Old, but especially in the New Testament, certainly the apostles of Christ, they express a Christocentric. They articulate a Christ-centered theology, a Christ-centered paradigm of the universe, where it's not mankind at the hub of that wheel. Rather, it's the Son of God. He's at the center of the wheel. You remove us as the hub and you make us a spoke in the wheel. We're not the center. Christ is the center of all things. He is at the center. This whole thing is happening because of him. Okay? The story, it's his story. It's not our story. We are ancillary characters. We are secondary characters in the story of the Son of God. And this is illustrated beautifully, elegantly by Paul in Colossians 1:15 through 17, where Paul writes, speaking of Jesus of Nazareth, Paul says that Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. That is a Christocentric universe. He is the hub. Everything else is the spoke, visible or is a spoke, visible or invisible, including us. So when you do that, what it does is it completely shifts the paradigm. There's a couple of things that you can begin to understand now. There were things happening in the universe before mankind entered the scene, because the story isn't about us. It's not our story. It's his story. And as you rightly explained, there were sentient beings, according to the scriptures, there were sentient beings in existence before the creation of Adam. What were these beings doing? Were they just waiting around, waiting for Adam to be created so that they could have a purpose in the universe? No. And now, of course, people will argue, well, they were created, basically simultaneously with mankind, or they were created on day one, and, man was created on day six. That's not the point, okay? Even the gap theory that you were explaining, which you did a very good job of explaining, it's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, did something exist before mankind? Was there intelligence in the universe before us? The Bible says yes. Was that intelligence from the earth? Well, obviously no, because the sons of God, the morning stars the morning stars were singing, and the sons of God were shouting for joy before the foundations of the earth were established. There was no earth, let alone mankind. Or you could interpret that as before the earth was renewed, as I would interpret that. There was no mankind. And yet you have these fully developed sentient beings. And by the way, those sentient beings are called the sons of God. As you rightly said, B'nai Elohim, B'nai Ha Elohim, the sons of God. That is a familial designation. This is a family. And the family existed before Adam. Adam was supposed to be a member of that family. If you read the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth, it goes all the way back through his genealogy that so-and-so was the son of so-and-so, was the son of so-and-so, going all the way back to Adam, who it says was the son of God. So you have Adam, the son of God, and you have these non-human sons of God, and they are apparently members of the same family. These are familial terms. The familial terms in the scriptures are not incidental. They're intentional, because that's what this whole thing is about. It's about a family. And we were supposed to be members of that family, but we all know what happened. Because of sin, we were divorced, sundered from the family of God. This is the human condition, subjected to death because of sin, and so forth. And that's what the gospel is about, restoring us back into that family. So that's the beginning point. These sons of God who pre-existed mankind are, by definition, extraterrestrial. Because anything that is not earthborn, anything whose origin is not planet Earth, is by definition extraterrestrial. So I don't know why people are tripping over these terms and having such a hard time. We could easily concede that the Bible unambiguously introduces us to a race of beings who are not only pre-existent to mankind, but are extraterrestrial. They do not come from planet Earth. They come from somewhere else. I think that the kingdom of heaven has locality. It's located somewhere in the universe. And they're somewhere out there. They're not from this place. And you can say, well, they're from a spiritual realm, or they're from another dimension. It doesn't make a difference. They're still extraterrestrial. So I think that we need, as Christians, we need to approach this topic with humility. Stop throwing the demon word at everything. Approach this topic with humility, and then embrace the complexity and understand that the biblical narrative, right out of the gates, as you rightly pointed out, right out of the gates, presents us with a Christocentric paradigm in which there are sentient beings who pre-exist us.
Yes, absolutely. And so as we try to continue to delineate from all of these terms, fallen angel, demon, and stuff like these terms that end up being used interchangeably far too often. Let's go back to that latest news of the 4 different aliens that were found. They described it as one like a Nordic, one the Greys, one like reptilian, one I don't know if I have the terms right, but one that looks like a bug.
Yeah, you got them right. Yeah.
Basically.
That's right.
So now that we've laid the groundwork of okay, so we can say biblically, confidently, that there was intelligence before mankind was created, that there were sons of God that observed the creation as is cited in Job. Okay, so we've identified there were angels. We know biblically that there are fallen angels, still angels, but angels that broke away. And then we learn later in Genesis chapter 6 that there was a whole nother creature created, which were the giants, the product of fallen angels with mankind, produced these giants, right, these mighty men, which you hear about in all kinds of other culture, that even in Greek legend, it may be referring to this phenomenon of these giants, half God, sons of God, and half human. Okay, so we have that foundation laid. So where do aliens come into this picture? Which one are the Nordics? Which are the reptilians? Like, well, how is that? We know that demons are disembodied, so they wouldn't have a body, right?
Well, okay, so I was going to say the short answer is nobody knows precisely, but let's back up and address very quickly this term fallen angels, because this term it's important to deconstruct this a little bit. So what we're talking about are sons of God. You have faithful sons of God in heaven who are still faithful to the kingdom of heaven. This is a question of allegiance, by the way. There's no commentary here on appearance or nature. It's just allegiance. You have sons of God who are members of the family of God, clearly, because they're called sons of God. They are still loyal to the kingdom. They're in the family, and then you have what could accurately be described as insubordinate or apostate sons of God. They're still sons of God, but they're in a state of insubordination and apostasy, and they are now the enemies of God. They have rebelled against the King of Heaven. They have made themselves the enemies of God, but within the biblical narrative, they're actually used by God. They're the agents of God as well. Satan is an agent of God in the scriptures. So, but nevertheless, they're in a state of enmity with God and condemnation. And by the way, those humans who reject Christ, they're also condemned, according to Jesus, with the devil and his angels, with the insubordinate sons of God, because those human beings who reject Christ are also insubordinate. They were created to be sons of God. They're in a state of insubordination and sin, and they're going to reap the same. They're going to reap the same judgment as the non-human sons of God. Now, that's one group of things that's out there. The sons of God, right? The good and bad. They both look this. There's no reason to think that quote unquote these are the fallen angels, by the way, the bad ones, the insubordinate sons of God. These are what we refer to as fallen angels. There's no reason to believe that they look any different than the good guys. I mean, they have the same nature. And I'm going to use this word very intentionally. They're from the same civilization. Okay, because the kingdom of heaven is a civilization. It is a civilization. That's what it is. So you have both of these players in the game, so to speak. The good guys, the bad guys. They look the same. They speak the same language. They come from the same civilization. I would argue they use the same technology, and they're in play in the universe already, good and bad. Right. That's why when you throw the word demon at this phenomenon, you at best you're only a third right. Because you're only identifying the evil element of this thing. What about the faithful sons of God? What about the angelic beings who are on assignment from the kingdom of heaven, who are here with us on earth according to the scriptures, and doing various things related to their purpose, to their deployment from the kingdom of heaven? So that's one thing, okay? But there may be other sentient things out there that don't fall into the category of angel, good or bad, of son of God, for loyal or disloyal. There may be other sentient creatures that were created for a purpose. Some of them may be loyal to the King of Heaven, some of them disloyal, maybe some of them indifferent. Why do I say that? Because we have that situation on earth among human beings right now. And why would it be any different? When we think about the universe, we don't have to. We've been given a blueprint we've been given an insight, rather, into the mind of the Maker. What is the insight that we've been given? We're living in it. Planet Earth. Okay, this is his thumbprint. This is the fingerprint of the Maker right here. Where we're living, we can look around at the natural world and infer some things about the Maker. In fact, Paul says that nobody is without excuse, because everybody should be able to understand that there's a Maker everyone should be able to come to the knowledge of God just living in the creation that the Maker has made, right? So we are living in the earth, among all of this effusion of life, the extreme biodiversity. There are millions of different kinds of species of animals, each one of them specifically created to adapt to their environment. That is the fingerprint. That's the thumbprint of the Maker, right? We already know this about God. He creates a lot of life, and the life is diverse. So could it be that God has created other sentient beings somewhere else that are not human and that are not angels or demons. There's something else. They're out there and there's something else, and they have their place in the kingdom of heaven. Their allegiance is either with the king or against him. Could that be? The answer is, of course, yes, it can. There is nothing whatsoever in the scriptures that constrains that would disallow that possibility. Again, I'm going to remind people, because this is the objection right away that I get from Christians. Well, if that's the case, God would have told us in the scriptures. That's just not biblical. That's not true. Again, I'm going to remind people, Deuteronomy 29:29, the secret things belong to the Lord our God. He keeps his secrets. He hasn't told us everything. And by the way, neither has the Bible. We live in a world right now with robots and artificial intelligence. Pretty soon, within the next decade, people are going to own robots with artificial intelligence in them, right? Just like you have a pet. These things will be walking around your house. There is nothing at all explicit in the scriptures. I'm not talking about some amorphous prophetic thing that can be extrapolated into artificial intelligence. I'm talking about something specific. There's nothing explicit in the scriptures that tells us, that informed people, that one day you will be living in a world with robots and artificial intelligence. Nothing. Okay? We're just not told everything. That's not the purpose of the scriptures. It isn't to inform us about everything in creation or everything that's going to happen. The primary purpose of the scriptures, the primary purpose, is to convey the gospel of Christ. That's the message. That's the memo. That is the primary purpose of the scriptures. It's not to tell us about extraterrestrial life. It's not to inform us about everything that's going to happen. God has his secrets. He conceals things. He keeps secrets. And that's the way it is. That is what the Bible tells us. So we are to take the things that have been revealed, again, most importantly, the gospel of Christ, and cling to that, and not try and go out there and throw Bible words at every phenomenon we see with the expectation that we're going to be able to solve all these mysteries with these handful of words. And very quickly, this is like someone, if I give you a task and I say, I want you to go out, I live here in Montana, I want you to go out into this beautiful mountainscape, and I want you to paint this mountainscape with all of the hundreds of colors and the variations and I want you to capture the beauty and the diversity of this landscape, but I'm only going to give you 4 crayons to do it, 4 colors. That would be impossible, because you simply don't have enough options. You don't have enough colors to be able to convey on canvas the beauty, the majesty of what you're seeing. That's what we have from the biblical narrative. We have a handful of terms that are not meant to address the totality of creation, which we can't even comprehend. And I think and it just takes humility to step back and say, look, I'm not going to limit the mind that I cannot comprehend, and I'm going to embrace the complexity, and I'm going to hold fast to the gospel of Christ when I do it. I think that's the appropriate reaction from Christians, and one that will be respected even in the secular world.
So on that note, you said, God says in his word that there are secrets just because we don't know about other possible intelligent design outside of our universe doesn't mean that those things don't exist. I've heard you talk about grays before. What is your take on what they are? Do they fall into any of the categories that we've already discussed, do you think, or is it something completely separate? And then I haven't heard you talk about these other ones. Do you think that this is a reputable source, that there are these other things? Yes,
I do. Okay, so what are gray aliens? Again, the answer is I don't know. I know about gray aliens, and I'm absolutely convinced they exist for many reasons. Nobody knows what these things are. Let me introduce this word. I used it earlier. The word demonic is appropriate, because the word demonic is something quite different than demon. Somebody who's demonic is acting in a way that is malicious, malevolent, nefarious. And I would use that word, and do use that word, of gray aliens, because I there's a lot of information about gray aliens. This may come as a shock to people who are new to this topic, but there's something called the abduction phenomenon. People have been being abducted by this particular faction for decades. And I know there's a narrative out there that alien abduction is just a CIA psyop. That is complete. And how could I be nice here? That's not true. Let's put it in those terms. That's not true. Okay. The abduction phenomenon is real. It is absolutely real. Millions of people around the world have been abducted by these beings in particular. So out of the four you mentioned, you have the gray aliens, the mantid or insectoid, or as Dr. David Jacobs denominates them, the insectolins. That's my preferred term for them. That, by the way, is one faction. Gray aliens and insectolins is one faction. There's a hierarchy there. The grays are the workforce.
Wait. So the grays and the did you say insectolins? You're saying they're
Dr. David Jacobs, who was an abduction, one of the preeminent abduction researchers, who's still alive, by the way. Dr. Jacobs, in his books, denominates the mantid insectoid creatures. He calls them insectolins. And it's the same, but they kind of look like praying mantises.
And the insectolins are like working together.
They're the same faction. They're the same faction. And so I believe, and many other researchers believe, that the insectolins, the ones that kind of look like praying mantises, not like the picture you had up, they don't look that much like a praying mantis. They actually look more like the grays, but their eyes are larger, and they wrap around their heads, and their faces come to a point, and they if they have mouths at all, they're very small. So they're very insect-like looking, and their arms are very much like a praying mantis. But
let me ask you this before you explain further, because I want to make sure I ask this question. Is it possible that these grays and insectolins are rebelled angels, fallen angels, whatever you want to talk about? Or are we to understand from the biblical narrative that all those that rebelled are in chains right now? Now I need a review.
No, that's not true. The Watchers specifically have been imprisoned. The Watchers from the Genesis 6 affair are imprisoned. The devil and his angels are still roaming freely, apparently, in the world.
So could the Bible says that angels?
Satan roams around like. I'm sorry?
So could they be fallen angels theoretically?
Okay, so I don't think so. No, I think every time we encounter an angel in the scriptures, they look like us, or rather, we look like them.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and I don't think they just make themselves appear like human beings. I think we look like them. Remember, we're members of the same family. They're sons of God. Adam was a son of God. We who believe in Christ are going to be given the power, according to Jesus, to become the sons of God again. That power, by the way, is the resurrection. So we're going back into the family. We're going to be sons of God again. So I believe that angels, we look like each other. We're from the same family. And I believe we both bear the image of our Father. By the way, there's no scripture in the Bible that says that humans alone bear the image of God. I believe that the other sons of God bear the image of the Father as well, specifically of his Son. Jesus, who is the expressed image and likeness of the Father, he is the image of God, the preeminent Son. We were made in the likeness of the Son of God, we and our elder siblings, who are the sons of God who pre-exist us. That's all very theological, and I walk people through that in my book, Birthright. So I don't believe that the grays and the insectolins and the reptilians and these other things are them. However, having said that, I think there is a possibility that the other faction, the Nordics, are them. Because the Nordics are described as somewhere around 7 feet tall. They look Scandinavian. They're described, and they're very comely. They're very beautiful beings. They're like superior human beings, basically. Now,
they look like someone that the people in Sodom and Gomorrah would want to threaten to.
Precisely right. Thank you for saying
together
that.
With.
That's exactly right. So let's talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. And remember, the angels that came to Abraham. Remember, they came to Abraham, and it was a couple of angels, and I believe the Son of God comes to Abraham, and they are conversing with Abraham. Abraham recognizes who they are. He has food prepared for them, and they eat it. They eat it in his presence, and they drink. They don't pretend to eat and drink. They actually eat and drink, because there's eating and drinking in the kingdom of heaven. So they eat and drink in his presence, and then the angels continue on. The book of Jubilees actually it gives us some insight into how Jews were thinking about this. They continue on to Gomorrah, to Sodom rather, and to Sodom and Gomorrah. And because Abraham, this whole situation sets up the Sodom and Gomorrah incident, because God tells Abraham he's going to destroy Sodom. And that's where you have Abraham negotiating with God. If there's 10 righteous men, and basically there's no righteous men, so God's going to utterly destroy it. Who destroys it? Those angels destroy it. They go to Sodom, and they're approaching the city, and Lot is sitting at the gate. Abraham's nephew Lot, he's sitting at the gate. He sees these two men coming, and he instantly knows who they are. He recognizes them as angels. He knows who they are. And he goes out and he ushers them into his home. How does he know who they are? Well, Abraham ate and drank with these guys. There's something about them that is conspicuous, that's different than us. It's similar to us, so that you could entertain angels unawares, as the New Testament says, right? You can entertain angels and not realize they're angels. So there's a similarity. Of course there is. We're siblings. But they approach the city of Sodom. Lot sees them. He brings them into his home, and as he's bringing them to his home, many of the men of Sodom see these beautiful men who probably look like very, very handsome men in their early 30s or something like that, late 20s. And there's something about them that is so compelling, so attractive. It's not because they look like lizard people or insectolins or little gray aliens. No, they look like very attractive young men. That's what they look like. I think they're blonde, golden blonde, blue eyes. I think there's something conspicuous about them that would make them stand out in the midst of the Semitic people. And they are recognized by Lot as angels, and they're recognized by the people of Sodom as very exotic, beautiful men. And of course, we know the story. The people of Sodom were sodomites. That's where the term comes from. And they wanted to sexually abuse these two men. And Lot, knowing who he's entertaining in his home here, right? That these are sons of God. These are angels. In order to protect them, he offers his daughters, his very daughters, to these men, to these disgusting sexual deviants, because he realizes who these people are. And then what do? Interestingly enough, after they strike or before they strike everybody blind, they eat. They're eating and drinking. Here we go again. They're eating and drinking with Lot. They're having dinner with him. And then they strike the men of Sodom blind and usher Lot and his family out of the city before it is utterly destroyed. So that was their mission, to go in, to get Lot, to bring him out before they destroy the city. That's what they did. It wasn't a spiritual destruction of Sodom, by the way. It was a physical obliteration of that ancient city. So what I'm hoping people are catching this. None of this is like a trance or a vision. None of this is like an ayahuasca trip. This is literal historical narrative. This is how angels appear in the Bible, always. They never have wings, by the way. The only time angels are depicted with wings is within prophetic iconography, which is symbolic and subject to interpretation. Whenever they appear in the narrative, they look like us, rather we look like them. So no, I do not believe that. I do not believe that insectolins and gray aliens and reptilians are angels. However, is it possible that the Nordics are the angelic race? Maybe, maybe not. It's just a conjecture on my part. I'm not sure that's true, but it's certainly possible. But that would mean that, and remember, I'm not saying that means therefore that they're good, because you have good ones and bad ones. Right. So you'd have to differentiate. And how do we know who's good and bad? You can't make that judgment based on appearances. There's nothing in the scripture that says if a being is ugly, they're a demon. There's nothing like that. Okay, we make that assumption ourselves. There's plenty of ugly human beings who are wonderful people, who are certainly not demons. Okay, so how do we judge? We can judge what proceeds from their mouth. Right? In other words, the messaging that comes forward and what they do. Are they saying and doing things that are consistent with the truth as we know it revealed in the scriptures? Or are they saying and doing things that would indicate that these are the enemies of God that they are just being deceptive and that they are in fact nefarious? That's the question. And that's it. That's all that we can judge. That's how we're told to test the spirits, to see whether or not the basically to draw a conclusion in regard to their allegiance, right? If you were to automatically knew what was what, you wouldn't have to test anything. That means there's good and bad things in play, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have to test anything. You could just make the assumption that everything's a demon. Well, that's not what the scriptures prescribe. We need to be wise. We need to test the spirits. What are they saying? What are they doing? Not deny the existence of things, but rather be ready to test things. And again, I think that's a much more, let's say, a much more humble, cautious approach to this whole situation than throwing the word demon around. So what are greys? What are mantids? What are reptilians? I have no idea. And neither does anyone else. Neither does anyone else. Well, see, you're displaying
the humility we all should have. And I wish I had you for longer, but we're already running out of time. I think that a good way to end this is if you want to dig into this and give it its proper time, you can get this book, Birthright, and it will go through some of these concepts. If you have ever heard them for the first time, your head might be spinning. But you can take your time and go through this book. You can go to his website and join Alberino Analysis to get some of your deeper questions answered. So that is an idea for you. And let's end. Also, we mentioned briefly Enoch. The Bible does quote word for word about Enoch. Why is it not in the Bible? Well, maybe we don't necessarily need it for our salvation, but you can have it as an addendum, a historical, a way to understand the rest of the Bible. So something else you might want to chew on. But let's end with Timothy. How do we balance having that humility to be open-minded to these things with the understanding that with some things, we do not need to have discernment and we do need to be guarded? How do you think is the best way to balance those concepts?
We're balancing them right now. There are plenty of people living on planet Earth who reject the gospel of Christ. They are utterly deceived, right? Without aliens, you could take every demon out of the equation, aliens, just leave it to human beings. And most of us living on planet Earth right now are already utterly deceived. Deception isn't a new thing. It's here. It's here.
Sure.
Now, is there going to be an aspect of this thing that is highly deceptive? Maybe even the deception of the end times, that the great deception that's insinuated in the scriptures, that's going to lead to the great apostasy, which isn't religious isn't religious. The word apostasy, it's not just a falling away from the faith. It's rebellion against God. That's what the apostasy is, which is kinetic war with the King of Heaven. I talk about that in Birthright. Yes, I believe there is an aspect of this thing that is going to play into what Christians commonly call the great deception. Absolutely. But so what? If you have faith in Christ right now, if your faith is solid, you're not going to be deceived. The Bible says that if those days weren't shortened, that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. So I'm not too worried about deception. We got plenty of deceived people right now. If you believe in Christ, anchor your roots deep in the gospel, understand what it means to be a human, understand what the gospel of Christ is, and you're not going to be deceived. You're going to hold fast to your faith. Just like the Christians who were thrown into the Colosseum, who had to either renounce their faith and be devoured by lions or reject Christ and be saved, right? Be saved from that terrible death. Well, what's the difference, right? You either hold fast your faith regardless, or you abandon your faith, whether it's because of persecution, or whether it's because of some deception, or whether it's because of peer pressure at your workplace. It's all the same. So I'm not worried about deception or great deception. Yes, deception is coming, but it's already here. It's been here for 2,000 years. In fact, it's been here for much longer than that. So the answer is always the same. Root yourself deeply in the gospel of Christ. Understand the gospel and believe in it with all your heart, and don't let it go until the day you draw your last breath. That's it.
That's it. I think that's a great way to end this, Timothy. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you on again soon. We can dig into another topic. The time always goes by so quickly. Thank you again. TimothyAlberino.com. All right. With that, I do want to encourage you to go to mypillow.com, use promo code KL to support Lindell TV. KL at mypillow.com. And that is all the time I have. So share with your friends. Get free with Kristi Leigh now on LindellTV.com.